Arizona. It's the late 1800s. For a number of years now, stories had been spreading throughout the frontier of a strange and hellish creature galloping through the landscape and attacking anything in its way. Covered from head to toe with flaming red hair, the creature had a long snake-like neck and cloven hooves. But the most horrific thing about it was that it was being ridden by a grinning, skeletal figure that had two empty black holes where the eyes should have been. All of the witnesses spoke about the monstrous grinning rider on its back that made no sound or gesture as it passed. It all began in the spring of 1883 in the form of a tragedy at a sheep ranch in Eagle Creek. A young woman named Sarah had been tending the family farmhouse as her children played inside when she heard the dogs barking aggressively outside. When she went out to see what was happening, she saw that they were barking at a point in the distance over the hill, and she watched in horror as the beast came into view over the peak and galloped straight towards her. She had never seen anything like this creature before. On its back, she could see the rider with its hollow eyes and its wide grin, and she was convinced that it was the devil coming from hell to claim her. Turning on her heels, she ran back into the farmhouse as it followed in hot pursuit, throwing dust up as it went. It was only when she reached the house and huddled inside with her children that she heard the screaming outside and suddenly remembered her sister, Elizabeth, who had been tending the fields nearby. But she was too terrified to go out to help, and eventually the screaming died down. When both her and her sister's husbands returned, she ran to the door and frantically told them what had happened, and the two men hurried back out to investigate, rifles in hand. Soon afterwards, they found Elizabeth, lying motionless in the sand and clearly beyond help. She had seemingly been trampled to death. There was no sign of the creature, but large hoof prints that they didn't recognize had churned up the sand all around her. They were cloven and nearly twice the size of a horse's. When Sarah told her story to the coroner of a devil riding a monster, he was skeptical, but he eventually submitted a verdict of death in some manner unknown. A few nights later, a group of prospectors at Chase's Creek said a strange animal just galloped through their camp and stamped on their tents. They had heard a loud scream and the sound of hoofs as it passed, and in the dark they could make out something that they described as too big to be a horse. Shortly afterwards, it attacked a small wagon train, knocking over two of the wagons. During one encounter, a rancher claimed that he had managed to lasso the monster just east of Phoenix. It happened one evening just as dusk was falling, when he saw the strange creature ambling around a nearby branding corral. When the beast saw him, it immediately charged, and he quickly lassoed it. But as soon as his horse reared up to let it pass as it's trained to do, the creature just rammed straight into the horse and rancher, knocking both to the ground and nearly killing the rancher. The creature then bolted away into the night. As it escaped, the rancher saw what he described as a skeletal human on its back. The creature and its ghoulish mount soon became known as the Red Ghost throughout Arizona, and sightings of the devil creature and its demon rider continued throughout the Arizona plains and along the frontier. Stories of encounters were soon embellished. It was 30 feet tall in one encounter and killed a grizzly bear in another. But a more sober sighting was reported by a rancher named Cyrus Hamlin at the Salt River northwest of Eagle Creek. Hamlin had been out tracking stray cattle when he spotted the legendary Red Ghost from a vantage point across the river. It was slowly ambling in the dense brush as Hamlin tried to make out what it was. When it reached an opening, he could make out more clearly, and in his mind, he was convinced that it was a camel. He had seen them before. But he also noted that it looked like there was a man on the saddle, and that the man appeared to be dead. Hamlin was honest and well regarded, and his account was taken seriously. But even then there were those who even scoffed at his account. A camel with a dead man sitting on its back wandering the Arizona frontier sounded just as implausible as a devil riding a beast from hell. Until one day, a group of prospectors saw the mythical creature feeding near the valley of the Verde River, and sitting atop was the ghoulish rider. They slowly approached, and as soon as they were within shooting distance, they all opened fire and missed. But in the middle of the fracas, the rider's head fell off as it made good its escape. When the prospectors caught up with the discarded cranium, they described it as a human skull with a few shreds of flesh and hair still clinging to it. But to their amazement, the devil rider was still sitting on the saddle as it galloped away into the distance, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and 5 bewildered prospectors in its wake. The mystery of the Red Ghost was finally brought to an end by a single gunshot in a vegetable patch in February 1893, 10 years after it began to terrorize Arizona. A rancher named Mizu Hastings woke up early one morning to the sight of the creature eating his turnips in the front yard. By all the accounts he had heard, it was the infamous Red Ghost with its long neck and the gruesome cadaverous mount on its harness. Reaching for his rifle, Hastings took a long and careful aim through his bedroom window and dropped the creature with one shot to the head. It was indeed a camel, and its gruesome passenger was indeed the remains of a human corpse. Hastings noted that the animal was covered in scars and welts. Knotted rawhide strips that were tied around it had cut into its flesh over time, and the straps from the harness had dug into the camel's side. This would have kept it in constant pain and may explain why it was so aggressive and quick to attack. It certainly would explain why it was angry enough to kill Elizabeth 10 years earlier. Having a decomposing corpse weighing on its back would have made it a target for flies, buzzards, and other unwelcomed guests, while the smell of death constantly hung in the air around it and the straps of the harness rubbed and chafed into its hide. That being said, we can only imagine the abject horror that the young lady must have felt being hunted down and then trampled by this huge roaring creature with the decomposing corpse saddled on its back. To her, it must have seemed like one of the horsemen of the apocalypse as it bore down on her. Mr. Ballin recently featured the story on his channel, up to the point that the red ghost turned out to be nothing more than a camel with a corpse on its back, and the mystery of the red ghost of Arizona finally being solved. Well, not quite. Although one mystery was solved, another remained. How on earth did a camel find its way to Arizona? And why was there a corpse on its harness tied so securely that it never fell off? And this is why the comments section in YouTube is sometimes the best part of that platform. I came across a number of them that appear to explain it all, and these can be backed up by military archives. Between 1855 and 1865, the US War Department created the United States Camel Corps. As these animals were perfectly adapted for the Sahara Desert, it was reasoned that they could fare just as well in the Arizona desert. And there was some success. The army found that the camels were hardy, resilient and endurant, and they were able to carry larger loads than horses. But the experiment didn't last. The problem with camels was in their temperament, or in their reaction to the way they were being handled. They could be cantankerous and stubborn, and they always wailed and protested when they were harnessed. In other words, they always seemed to have the hump. But it was their ability to spit with horrifying accuracy at anyone who annoyed them that infuriated their handlers, and their handlers eventually grew to hate them with a passion. They were also very difficult to break, and here is where the explanation of the corpse may lie. According to one commentator, while breaking horses back in those days, a soldier would be tied securely to the harness until the horse was finally broken. Only then would he be untied, but he needed someone else to do that, as he was unable to do it himself. Apparently, this same technique was also used with camels, but in this particular case, it's believed the camel bolted and the soldier was unable to free himself. Given how dangerous the frontiers were back then, I can only imagine the various fates the soldier had envisioned for himself as he was carried away to his eventual doom. According to one post I read, there is an article at the museum in Fort Irwin which does detail instances of camels refusing to be broken and galloping off into the desert with their unfortunate handlers still tied to them, never to be seen again. Other theories along this line tell of a cadet who was terrified of the camel, and so he had to be tied securely in place to prevent him from jumping or falling off, only for the camel to suddenly panic and make a run for it with his reluctant passenger. In one version of the story, the soldier was so frightened that he died of a heart attack in the saddle. Another version has an injured soldier who was part of a caravan tying his own hands to the pommel of the saddle as he was too weak and tired to hold on. But he wasn't able to untie himself as the camel wandered off course and far away from the rest of the caravan. Other theories point towards a thief being secured to the harness as punishment, and this may hold some weight because similar punishments had been meted out to criminals before, but on horseback. At any rate, the Camel Corps experiment was abandoned in 1866. The remaining army camels were sold at auction or cut loose and set free, where they slowly died off one by one in the years that followed. Others were hunted down and killed. The Red Ghost Camel continued to wander the Arizona frontier until 1893, when Mizzou Hastings finally brought it down. Good night, wherever you are.